Before cinematic storytelling became a gaming standard, the PlayStation 1 was already experimenting with it. It was a time when developers were pushing boundaries, using limited polygons, grainy textures, and pre-rendered backdrops to make players feel something more than just gameplay. These weren't just adventures or RPGs. They were playable experiences that felt like interactive cinema, where every camera angle, soundtrack cue, and line of dialogue pulled us deeper into a story that could rival Hollywood itself. If you end up liking the content, please subscribe for more, and I'd appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up and tell me what you think down below. Love to hear it. Silent Hill crafted its own nightmare entirely, and did it with the psychological precision of an art house film. From its fog-drenched streets to its surreal imagery, it wasn't just about jump scares. It was about dread, grief, and guilt, told through atmosphere rather than exposition. The game opens like a mystery film, a father searching for his missing daughter in a deserted town. But as the story unfolds, the lines between reality and hallucination blur until you're never quite sure what's real. That sense of disorientation isn't an accident. Every flickering light and warped camera angle is there to make you feel uneasy. The game's camera work is cinematic in the purest sense. It lingers, pans slowly, and tilts at unsettling angles, evoking the language of horror cinema. When the siren wails and the world peels away into rust and rot, it feels like a scene from a psychological thriller shot on grainy film. The use of sound is equally deliberate. The score mixes ambient noise, scraping metal, and silence to create an emotional rhythm that feels more like sound design than music. You don't just play it, you inhabit it. The storytelling breaks from typical horror game conventions. Instead of a straightforward plot, it gives you fragments that force you to piece together meaning, like an audience decoding symbolism in a film. Its characters aren't caricatures. They're broken people, each carrying emotional trauma that manifests through the environment itself. The monster design is metaphorical, not random. Each creature feels like a projection of guilt, loss, or pain. It's not flawless. The combat is clunky, the controls stiff, and the visuals dated even by late PS1 standards. But none of that dulls its power. Like a grainy cult classic, Silent Hill uses imperfection to heighten its realism. Every awkward movement and murky texture adds to its unease. It is cinematic horror at its purest, deeply psychological, visually haunting, and impossible to forget. Final Fantasy VIII didn't just look like a movie, it acted like one. Coming off the success of FF7, Square aimed higher, crafting a love story set against a backdrop of war, time travel, and fate. From its CG-animated opening, Squall and Cypher dueling under a storm of flower petals, to its sweeping orchestral score, the game radiated cinematic ambition. Every scene was framed with camera angles and transitions that felt intentional, more film than fantasy RPG. At its heart, it was a character-driven drama. It wasn't just about saving the world, it was about the emotional growth of its cast. Squall's stoic demeanor, slowly giving way to vulnerability, made him feel like a protagonist torn from a coming-of-age film. The romance between him and Renoa played out not through dialogue trees, but through moments of subtle body language and quiet connection. Those elevator glances, waltz sequences, and emotional silences gave the game a depth that few others matched. It didn't just tell a love story, it showed it with cinematic restraint. Visually, it was one of the most ambitious games on the console. The CG cutscenes were groundbreaking, fluid, expressive, and seamlessly integrated into gameplay. When Balamgarden takes flight for the first time, or when the Ragnarok ship soars through space, it feels like watching a big-budget animated film unfold in real time. Nobuo Uematsu's score only deepened that cinematic feel. Tracks like Eyes on Me gave the game emotional resonance far beyond its polygonal visuals. Of course, the game isn't flawless. Its junction system confused some players, and its pacing occasionally dragged during quieter stretches. But its tone, presentation, and structure were undeniably filmic. It was melodramatic, romantic, and unapologetically stylish. Where most games aim to thrill, Final Fantasy VIII wanted to move you. And that's what makes it one of the PS1's most cinematic experiences. Few games blur the line between cinema and gameplay as boldly as Metal Gear Solid. Released in 1998, it redefined what storytelling in video games could be. Hideo Kojima crafted it like a spy thriller, complete with dynamic camera work, long conversations about loyalty and politics, and moments that felt straight out of a film script. From the opening infiltration of Shadow Moses to the climactic fistfight atop Metal Gear Rex, every scene was directed with cinematic precision. The camera pans, the voice acting, and the score, all of it worked together to create tension and immersion unlike anything else on the PS1. The brilliance of this lies in how it used the limitations of the console to feel more film-like. Each codec call was framed like dialogue between actors. The game's pacing followed a screenwriter's rhythm. Quiet build-up, sudden action, emotional payoffs. Its boss fights weren't just mechanical challenges. They were character-driven moments that revealed personality and theme. Encounters like Psycho Mantis broke the fourth wall in ways that would have felt gimmicky elsewhere, but here served the cinematic tone. It wasn't just a game mechanic. It was storytelling through interactivity. Voice acting was revolutionary for its time. David Hayter's performance as Solid Snake gave the character depth and charisma, while the rest of the cast delivered emotional nuance unheard of in that generation. The soundtrack underscored every twist, from stealthy tension to tragic revelation. By the time Snake faces the boss, the emotional weight feels earned because of how carefully the story builds. If there's one critique, it's that MGS could be self-indulgent. Cutscenes ran long, and dialogue often dove deep into exposition. But that's also what made it cinematic. It was ambitious, confident, and unapologetically story-driven. For many, it was the first time a video game felt like a movie you could play, and that's why it remains a timeless masterpiece. Before stealth games were sleek or cinematic, Tenchu Stealth Assassins was already merging both ideas into something hauntingly beautiful. Released in 1998, it wasn't just a game about sneaking. It was about atmosphere, pacing, and tension, all elements that mirror a samurai-era thriller. The game's use of lighting, shadow, and deliberate pacing turned each level into a self-contained short film. Slow, deliberate, and intense. You played as Rikamaru, or Ayame, ninjas bound by duty and morality, navigating Japan's feudal world with precision and restraint. The storytelling was minimal, yet it carried emotional weight through tone rather than exposition. Missions began with scrolls setting the mood. When you struck from the shadows, the camera didn't glorify it. Every assassination felt like a moral decision, not just a gameplay mechanic. The slow-motion kills and the sound of blades cutting through silence were as much about atmosphere as they were about action. The sound design was its secret weapon. Minimal music, distant winds, the rustle of grass. Everything worked in harmony to create a cinematic rhythm. You were the predator, and the camera was your witness. Unlike most action games of the time, it rewarded patience, timing, and awareness. The camera placement, often hovering just over your shoulder or framing you from above, gave the impression of a silent director guiding each scene. It felt intimate, voyeuristic even. Of course, the game showed its age. The controls were clunky, the AI inconsistent, and the polygonal environment simple. Yet, those limitations gave it a charm, a gritty film grain feel that worked perfectly for its tone. It didn't look polished, it looked real. That grounded quality made every kill, every escape feel authentic. In many ways, Tenchu captured the essence of cinema better than games, with far more visual fidelity.
Misguided soul.
If Resident Evil introduced cinematic horror to gaming, 2 perfected it. From its explosive opening sequence in a burning raccoon city to its split-story structure, it played out like a survival horror film brought to life. The fixed camera angles, far from being a limitation, gave the game the composition of a tense thriller, each shot framed from maximum suspense, every shadow and corner hiding a potential scare. When you walked down a hallway and the camera lingered just a moment too long, It wasn't clunky, it was direction. It built tension like a filmmaker holding a shot before the jump. What made it stand out was its sense of rhythm. It knew when to terrify and when to let you breathe. After a brutal encounter or a claustrophobic escape, the game would slow down, giving you time to explore and reflect before tightening the grip again. The pacing was pure Hollywood horror. Leon and Claire's dual campaigns added layers of cinematic storytelling, letting players experience the same nightmare from two perspectives, each with its own reveals and emotional beats. That structure was revolutionary for its time, creating the kind of narrative cross-cutting you'd expect in film. Every detail worked to sell the atmosphere. The sound design, the echoing footsteps, the distant groans of zombies, the rumble of thunder outside, was crafted to immerse you like a surround sound theater experience. The pre-rendered backgrounds, though static, looked cinematic thanks to their lighting and composition. Each corridor felt lived in, like a real movie set built for tension and dread. Of course, the controls were stiff, and the dialogue occasionally dipped into B-movie territory. But that camp was part of its charm. It didn't feel like a flaw. It felt like a stylistic choice, the same way classic horror films embraced melodrama. When the credits rolled, you didn't feel like you'd beaten a level. You felt like you'd survived a movie. When Capcom released Dino Crisis, it wasn't just another survival horror title. It was a full-blown cinematic thriller disguised as a game. It swapped zombies for prehistoric predators and claustrophobic mansions for a high-tech research facility straight out of Jurassic Park. From the moment Special Agent Regina descends into the island compound, the game sets a tone of tension and isolation that feels lifted from a blockbuster film. Every camera angle, ambient sound, and lighting cue is calculated to make you feel like you're walking through a live-action set. What made this so cinematic was its pacing. The game constantly shifts between moments of quiet suspense and explosive chaos. The slow creak of a door gives way to the roar of a raptor, the stillness of a hallway shattered by sudden motion. The fixed camera angles heighten the dread, cutting sharply between perspectives like a director choosing when to reveal or conceal danger. The facility itself feels alive, sterile yet hostile, its metal walls echoing every footstep and gunshot like sound design crafted for surround theaters. Regina's calm professionalism sets her apart from most PS1 protagonists. She behaves like a believable film lead. Her clipped dialogue, pragmatic tone, and subtle humor make her feel grounded, as if she's the star of a mid-90s sci-fi thriller rather than a game character. The plot unfolds through tight, efficient dialogue scenes and well-timed revelations, with multiple endings that make it feel like an alternate cut film you can reshape through choices. The dinosaurs themselves are directed like monsters, their sudden lunges, slow stalking, and brutal attacks choreographed for maximum shock value. Sure, the puzzles can feel tedious and the backtracking occasionally breaks momentum, but even that contributes to the mounting tension. Every corridor you revisit feels more dangerous than before. Dino Crisis was pure Hollywood action, lean, stylish, and terrifyingly alive. Square's Parasite Eve was one of the first games to truly merge cinematic storytelling with RPG mechanics, and even today, it feels like a playable supernatural thriller. Set in a hauntingly realistic version of New York City, it opens with an unforgettable opera scene where the audience spontaneously combusts, a sequence so shocking and perfectly directed that it still feels modern. From that moment, the tone is clear. This isn't just a game about monsters. It's about mystery, horror, and human emotion told through film-like presentation. The direction throughout is deliberate and confident. Each cutscene feels storyboard like a live-action film, with moody lighting, deliberate camera pans, and slow, tension-building zooms. Aya Brea, the protagonist, isn't portrayed as a typical RPG hero. She's grounded, vulnerable, and quietly strong, more in line with a cinematic lead than a power fantasy. The game's pacing mirrors that of a psychological thriller. Moments of quiet investigation punctuated by sudden bursts of horror and revelation. Its use of real-world locations like Carnegie Hall and Central Park adds to the realism, grounding the supernatural within the familiar, just as a good horror film would. Cinematically, It also pushed boundaries with its use of CG. The cutscenes were film quality for their time, detailed, expressive, and scored with a haunting soundtrack that shifted from mournful piano to unsettling ominous. The editing between gameplay and pre-rendered sequences was so seamless that it blurred the line between watching and playing. If it has flaws, it's that its pacing can feel uneven, and its hybrid battle system sometimes interrupts the cinematic flow. But even that experimentation adds to its identity. It's a movie trying to break out of the game format. By the end, Parasite Eve feels less like a traditional RPG and more like a self-contained sci-fi film about humanity, evolution, and fear. When people remember cinematic RPGs on the PS1, The Legend of Dragoon often gets overlooked. And that's a shame, because few games from that era were as unapologetically dramatic. It felt like a sprawling fantasy epic that could have easily been adapted into a full-length animated film. From its grand orchestral score to its sweeping camera angles during battle transformations, it was a spectacle in every sense of the word. The story followed Dart and his companions on a journey filled with betrayal, destiny, and tragedy. Classic cinematic ingredients, delivered with flair and emotion. What made it stand out was its sense of scale and presentation. Every cutscene felt like a carefully choreographed moment in a big-budget fantasy movie. The pre-rendered backdrops and dynamic camera pans during battles gave the game an energy that few turn-based RPGs managed to capture. And then there were the Dragoon transformations, characters enveloped in light, armor bursting from nowhere, wings unfurling to the sound of thunder. It was over-the-top, theatrical, and undeniably cinematic. Even outside of combat, it carried itself with the gravitas of a film. The voice acting, while inconsistent, added to its emotional reach, and the game's pacing allowed moments of reflection between high-stakes battles. It wasn't afraid to linger on scenes, to let emotions breathe before the next big confrontation. Its narrative structure followed a familiar cinematic arc: personal loss, rising conflict, revelation, and redemption. The emotional beats hit hard, especially as the mysteries of the Dragoons unfolded. Still, the game wasn't perfect. Its translation was occasionally rough, its combat system demanding precise timing that not everyone enjoyed, and its pacing could drag in long stretches. But even with its imperfections, The Legend of Dragoon had heart. It believed in its story, in its spectacle, and in its emotional sincerity. It wanted to be larger than life, and it succeeded. There's cinematic ambition, and then there's Vagrant Story, a game that feels less like an RPG and more like a political thriller directed by a visionary filmmaker. From its opening title sequence, where the camera glides over rooftops and settles into a candlelit council chamber, it's clear that Square wasn't just making another fantasy game. They were crafting a narrative drama about power, faith, and betrayal that just happened to be interactive. The camera is its greatest weapon. Every shot, whether during combat or conversation, is composed with deliberate framing and movement. Cutscenes transition seamlessly into gameplay without loading breaks, giving it a cinematic continuity that was almost unheard of on PS1. Characters aren't exaggerated heroes. They're actors in a mature political story, voiced through expressive text boxes and animation that convey emotion better than many fully voiced games of its time. Its world is rendered like a film set, every corridor and chamber lit by flickering torches, every shadow thick with mood. The muted color palette and Gothic architecture evoke the same oppressive tone as a historical drama or dark fantasy epic. The script, too, reads like a screenplay. Conversations unfold with pauses, camera cuts, and lingering silences that build tension naturally. It's a slow burn, but one that rewards patience with atmosphere and intrigue. If Vagrant Story has a weakness, it's that its depth can feel intimidating. The combat and crafting systems are complex, and the pacing can drag for players expecting constant action. But that deliberate pacing is part of what makes it cinematic. It forces you to observe, not just act. Every battle, every revelation feels purposeful. By the end, you don't just remember the gameplay. You remember the feeling of it, the tone, the way light hit the stone walls, the weight of its silence. Few PS1 games wore their cinematic ambition on their sleeve, quite like Lunar Silver Star Story Complete. Originally a remake of a Sega CD classic, the PS1 version transformed it into something more than an RPG. It became an emotional, animated film that you could play. From its anime-style cutscenes to its sweeping orchestral soundtrack, every part of Lunar was designed to feel like a grand fantasy adventure unfolding before your eyes. The story of Alex, a dreamer yearning to become a hero, and Luna, his childhood friend, plays out with warmth, heartbreak, and sincerity that rivaled the best animated epics of its time. What made it feel so cinematic was how seamlessly it blended its gameplay and storytelling. The hand-drawn cutscenes weren't just flashy interludes, they mattered. They conveyed emotion, deepened relationships, and made the world feel alive. Every character was written with charm and humor, their dialogue delivered with fully voiced performances that brought them to life. Visually, the game leaned into the aesthetics of anime movies, clean framing, expressive character poses, and dynamic camera pans during battle animations. The world was colorful and romantic, not gritty or abstract. Each village and temple felt like a storybook setting, inviting players to invest emotionally rather than mechanically. The music elevated the experience further. Its soaring themes and gentle melodies framed every scene like a film score guiding the heart. Of course, some of its design feels dated now. Random encounters can slow the pace, and the combat system is simple compared to modern standards. But those mechanics fade into the background because the presentation carries everything. You don't remember the grind. You remember the cutscenes, the voices, the moments of vulnerability and triumph. Lunar Silver Star Story Complete was one of the first RPGs that truly felt cinematic, full of heart, hope, and wonder.